Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman and I am your host. Today my guest is Tony McAleer and we're talking to him from Vancouver. Tony is a former skinhead and he is now the president and executive director of an organization called Life After Hate. Tony, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I don't have to explain a lot, Life After Hate. So let's talk about kind of a bit of your journey, you know, because we hear the word skinhead and we go, ugh. So tell me about that part of your life.
Well, I grew up in contrary to popular belief, a middle-class family. When my father was a psychiatrist. There's the old adage, the cobbler's kids go to school with holes in their shoes. What do you think the psychiatrist kid goes to school with?
Uh-huh.
So I was this bright, sensitive, mischievous, stubborn, curious kid growing up in a household where it really wasn't safe to be emotionally sensitive. And I learned that at a fairly early age to, my sensitive emotions were going to get shamed, to stuff them down and avoid feeling them. I went to Catholic school where, after in grade 5 when I was 10, I walked in on my father with another woman, and
wow.
I really started to get angry, and I started to go from a straight A student, to a C student, and by the next year at school, my parents and the teacher got together, and they decided that they tried all different kinds of way to motivate me, but none of it had worked. So they thought caning me if I didn't get a B would be the right answer. It didn't work, but I would get like a meter stick on the rear end, quote, every time I didn't get a B on a major test or assignment, and that made my anger even greater, and I started listening, went from listening to Queen and bands like that to getting into punk rock and that angry music that really vibed with where I was at. It really connected with that.
Can I interrupt you here for a second? So you're a kid, and that's one of the things we sometimes forget, like, 4th grade, 5th grade, whatever, you're really still this kid. And so at home, you're shamed for any kind of emotional expression or creative expression. B, you find your father with another woman, and I suspect you had to keep that secret?
No, I told my mom.
Oh, I'm sure that brought about great results. And so you see this horrible thing. You're in school where they're teaching you that the best way to get you motivated is to hit you, beat you. And so where do you go with all those emotions? So you can certainly understand where there's this sense of frustration building up and this sense of anger, and then what to do with all of that. And then, as you said, you're kind of drawn to the kind of music that gives expression to that, if I'm correct.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And I want to point out that I don't blame anything that happened on my childhood. Everything I did in my life, I chose to do. But it just helps give you some context.
Yes.
Because human beings don't do anything without a payoff. So what was the payoff that I was getting by choosing a lifestyle of violence, right? I think unresolved anger always expresses itself as violence. And most of the time we direct that violence to ourselves, and eating disorders, risky sexual behavior, substance abuse, you name it. But sometimes we take that anger and violence and direct it towards others, and I did both. And I sought out an ideology and a youth subculture in the skinhead music scene that gave me permission and justification to be violent. So the music that I ended up listening to was like soccer hooligan music, and it was all about drinking and fighting, and that's what we did for fun on weekends. And and somebody asked me once, Tony, how did you lose your humanity? And I said, I didn't lose it. I traded it for acceptance and approval till there was nothing left.
Wow, that's that's a pivotal statement. Yeah, you traded it for acceptance and approval. And you can get that that's all we're looking for, really. And if you're not getting it in the source where you're supposed to get it. And as you said, this is not about the blame game. Your parents did what they did because that's how they perceived the world. And you chose your choices because of how you perceive the world. But as a child, you know, the path of least resistance, you find something that is a match. You're not looking as to whether this is good, bad, or whatever. It feels good in the moment. And
Absolutely.
so how long did you stay engaged in that? And second question, as you were participating in this violence, was there any voice in your head saying you shouldn't be doing this?
Yeah, no, definitely. But it was a process of desensitization. Because I didn't grow up with violence in my household. I got it, at school. But some of the guys I hung out with, they were dodging punches in the crib. I mean, they were much more proficient at violence than I was. I had to really learn it. It was kind of awkward, but I did become quite competent at it. But it's a sense of desensitization, and there certainly were violent events where I witnessed damage and harm being done to people that I was not okay with, but I participated anyways.
Yeah. Wow.
Sense.
And so for anyone listening to this, and let's say they're kind of in the same position, was there anything that anyone could have said or done at that point that would have had you kind of reverse course or steered somewhere different?
I think at the height of my involvement, when I was involved with White Aryan Resistance and going to Idaho and Aryan Nations and all of those different, and I ran a hate phone line. In that place, I got so much of my identity, who I was in the world was wrapped up in that identity, that, again, you'd have to bring something pretty huge to the table for me to trade that up for something else. So I think in a conversational sense, there was no way. I was debating and arguing around the family, was a sport that I grew up with. And I could debate anybody on anything about immigration, the Holocaust, you name it. And it was like fortress intellect. I was gifted with pretty good IQ. And that was how I bullied people when I wasn't using my fists was my intellect. So getting through fortress intellect was no easy task. And really, in the end, what did get through was compassion. And so with the work that we do, Life After Hate, helping young people and older people exit these types of groups, we don't do it by trying to intellectually change the mind. We expose them to compassion. And for me, that compassion first showed up in the birth of my daughter. And that caused me to question everything I was doing, because the choices I was making, were having a negative impact on her life, on her safety, on the income level that I earned. I was so high profile, I was unemployable. And
go ahead.
And so for the first time in my life, I was making decisions for somebody other than myself, because I believed I'd be dead or in jail by the age of 30 when I was 20.
And you were 20 when your daughter was born?
23.
23.
And at that point, I'm like, well, that, it's a pretty selfish thing to do. Now that I've, I had a son 15 months later. But the beautiful thing about the birth of a child, and this theme comes up over and over and over again in all of the research and studies that working with formers, is that the birth of a child, and it seems in particular the birth of a female child, and feminine energy coming in to counter the hyper masculine energy, and children, that's what they're full of compassion. They don't see all the flaws that we see in ourselves and believe we see in ourselves. That they love us unconditionally. They give us compassion, and for me, it was safe to
Wow.
have those emotions because a child can't shame you. A child can't reject you, at least not till they hit the teens. And it allowed me to let my guard down and experience those emotions again in a safe way.
Wow. Yeah, how powerful is that? And then, so, clearly you've been living this lifestyle for a while. Did you spend any time in jail?
A couple of days,
Right.
My phone line, I was sentenced to 3 months in prison and had a fine, but that was overturned at the Supreme Court level.
Right. So now you have the birth of this child and your heart starts to open and you're not so guarded. How does that then, because it would be, you could make the other choice and work hard to harden your heart even further just to protect yourself. What did that then segue into for you?
Well, and of course, yeah, it's. I've often joked that the answer to violent extremism is not some fertility program, because it's not so much the birth of the child, but the opportunity that birth creates, and in stepping up to the plate and accepting that I was a single father of these two children for most of their lives, who I had to be in order to accept that responsibility and do that well. That was very transformational. I had to become, responsible and put other people before my own wants and such, and that alone was transformational. And the interesting thing is that whole identity that I wrapped myself in was replaced.
Wow.
It's not fair, but I used to get so much accolades for being the single dad, with two kids full time.
Yes.
I felt, I even at the time felt a little guilty because, if I was a woman, there would be no such glory.
Right, right. But so again, the demands of being a father kind of opened that door for you. But how could you then make sense of your past and let go of that? Because there must have been a lot of guilt, I'm assuming, with some of the things that you did.
Absolutely. When people leave extremist groups, it tends to be two phases, and the first one is disengagement.
Yes.
So I stopped hanging around with the people, and in my mind, I still rationalized it. I didn't give up my beliefs. I said, you know what? Why should I, be like Don Quixote jousting the windmill, doing all of this public stuff to, for a bunch of white people who couldn't care whether I lived or died. If I really want to make a contribution in the white race, I have to make sure that these children thrive, and that's going to be my contribution. And that's how I rationalized it to myself, to walk away from the movement I've been so heavily involved in and to focus on the children. As I put distance between myself and those people, and because it's an incredibly negative energy space and dysfunctional. In the 15 years I was involved, I can't think of a single person that was experiencing joy on a regular basis. Most of the people were actually black holes of joy. And,
Wow.
And so as I distanced myself from that, I started to shift, but I still maintain the belief system. It wasn't until I met a mentor in 2005, doing some personal development workshops and did some one-on-one work with him. He's a psychologist. And I remember in our first session, and I'd hit it off with the guy because I was born in England. I was born in Liverpool. He was from Manchester, and we both liked Monty Python. We really connected. And I remember the first session in his office, he goes, "I'm Jewish, right?" And I'm like, "Of course." The irony of it. But he saw me not for what I had done and things that I did, but for who I was, and that was another pivotal place where. And this comes up again and again and again in the work that we do. Getting compassion from someone who we don't feel we deserve it from.
Wow.
And for that Jewish man to to see the humanity in me and to help me fight for that. That was a powerful thing. The other piece that I don't want to forget is my mother never gave up, and she always had compassion in the background. So the children, my mother, and that mentor were the three sources of compassion that that really brought me back to rediscovering and participating in my and everyone else's humanity. There's one thing that people that are in that real negative space of hate or anything like that is, when I say they become emotional black holes, and this part I struggled with the most was compassion for myself. And and it's with all the things that I've done, and people have said, well, that's pretty self-serving. Like, what do you do for you? You can have compassion, forgive yourself. But I look at myself. If I don't do that, I'm an emotional black hole, and I suck the joy out of everyone around me, because that's what people that don't experience joy, it's the best thing that they do.
Yeah.
They suck the joy out of the people around them. And for me not to engage in that compassion and forgiveness of myself is for me to suck the joy out of people around me. So the more I can have compassion and forgiveness for myself, the more I reduce my capacity to do harm in the world, and I had to reframe it that way to be able to accept it and let it in. The mission statement of Life After Hate is to inspire people and communities to a place of compassion and forgiveness for self and for all people. I think if we have compassion and forgiveness for everyone else but ourselves, that's about ego. It's about being seen to be compassionate. If we have compassion and forgiveness for ourselves and nobody else, that's narcissism. And I think both have to be in play at the same time for it to be healthy and balanced.
Yeah, that's so extraordinarily powerful, because it's one thing to think that, first of all, the Jewish psychologist, it would be so easy for him to go on a rant or to be angry at you, and yet what he tapped into was your humanity. And I think that what you're talking about is really our job as human beings is to do that, because, and as you say, if you do it for others and you don't do it for yourself, it's kind of is a lie, because you are a human being, and some of it comes from the aspect of feeling like we don't deserve it, but everybody could say that. So it doesn't become about deserving or not deserving. It's just about being human being and having compassion for the human condition. So what had you then start this organization?
Well, I knew once I started the work with Bob Barron is his name, that I would have to take the lessons that I've learned and share it, because it was so powerful, the transformation that was happening in my life. And in 2011, I was invited to the Summit Against Violent Extremism in Dublin, which was organized by Google Ideas, which is Google's think tank. And they brought together 50 former violent extremists from around the world. 6 of us were skinheads, but there were members of the Irish Republican Army, the Ulster Volunteer Force, their Protestant counter, FARC, Baader Meinhof, Red Brigade, Mujahideen, you name it, around the world, as well as 30 victims and survivors. I think it's critical to have their voices whenever we talk about this stuff. And brought them together to kind of look at what are the common things that get young people to join these groups, and what are the things that get them to leave. And it was fascinating in the side conversations, having a beer after some of the events, and people start telling you their stories, and they were all the same. The circumstances and the places are different, but it didn't matter what socioeconomic class, what race, what country, whether it was religious or ideological. It was about acceptance. It was about a sense of power and significance and purpose. And when you boil their stories down, those common elements were there in about 90% of them. And again, time after time, birth of a daughter, birth of a daughter, birth of a daughter, the same story kept showing up. And That was where I'd met the other people that had just started Life After Hate, and I joined up with them then, because I realized, there was, there is common reasons why people join, and there's common reasons why people leave, and if that's the way it works, then we can take our own lessons and help people who are what we want to work.
What was the last thing you said? I didn't hear that.
So we can help people who are where we once were.
Yes.
That gives us a unique and powerful tool in dealing with this, because we were there. We have sort of a credibility, and I know what it was like to be in that.
Yeah.
To be in it, because I was there too.
So in this meeting in Dublin, where there were all these, as you call them, formers, so you're saying their stories are similar. Again, it's looking for significance, looking for acceptance, and then something intruded, very often the birth of a daughter. And what were these other people? Was there a commonality to what their lives looked like afterwards, or what they were doing with their lives?
Well, I mean, clearly their lives were different. People were at different levels of process and healing.
Yes.
The first phase is the disengagement. The second phase, which is what Dov Baron did with me, was the de-radicalization. That was, tearing down the belief structure. And the way that he did that, incidentally enough, was not to go in and line by line, tear down the belief structure intellectually, but rather through the heart. Because I think that anyone holding that type of violent ideology, and you can tell when they talk, everything's black and white, us versus them. I think the foundation for that type of ideology is the lie that we tell ourselves, the lie that we believe about ourselves, that we come into this world and we're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from everyone else, we're alone, and that's the lie. So we're looking for connection in all these external ways. Once I had some experiences where I understood that we are all connected. Birth of a Child certainly did that. I got fascinated with spirituality and quantum physics and the science behind connection. And once I really got that, and I reconnected to my own heart, I reconnected to myself, then the foundation of that separateness, that lie that holds up the rest of it, it just came down like a house of cards.
Wow. So I have a question for you. We have about 5 minutes left. What specifically are the aims and processes that you are doing with the organization?
So we've just launched an exit program, which is specifically helping people leave different groups. It's based on a European model that's been very successful. We do education and a lot of public speaking and teaching and stuff, and it's a very heart-based approach. And what we offer is no judgment, just help. We absolutely judgmental of the ideology and the violence and the actions, but not the individual.
And have you had, when you go out and do these talks, have you had anyone come up to you afterwards, or does it typically take a lot of time?
Different people are, depending on their level of involvement. We try to engage, community partners. So we'll work with a youth worker and help them deal with the person, where they need therapy. We're not therapists. Right. We refer them, for tattoo removal and to start that, get them going on that process. There's no short fix for it.
Right. It's interesting because I think from what you said, at the point where you're in it, you're so in it that it would take something like really dramatic to kind of shift that. And yet you describe the people who are in it as like this void of any joy, and yet so entrenched in it so that to provide some kind of, as you say, it's when their heart shut down, kind of, or, you know, through anger and all the events, that they are drawn to these organizations, and then it's coming back through opening the heart.
That's right. That's right. And the opportunities for us to get in there and start to do that, I think, exist when they're in a place where the fantasy of what these movements are all about and the reality don't meet up.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of, you know, hero's journey and archetypical, you know, hyper masculinity and stuff, but you get there and you're in this place of your relationships don't work, your career's not going to work, nothing in your life will work when you're in that space, and that's when I think people are vulnerable to being fed up and tired and wanting something different.
Last question. Did any of your former friends come after you in any way as you started to disengage?
No, because I did it, you know, I call it faded to black. I didn't say you guys are all idiots, I'm out of here. I just, you know, slowly
disappeared.
You know, my way out and became less visible, and I didn't go public until I was, you know, 15 years out of it.
Right.
That what I had done was wrong. So, you know, people said, well, you know, it's like he's done his tour of duty.
Yeah. Tony, we're at the end of our conversation. I invite people to check out your website, to reach out to you if there's anything that piques their interest. And I really want to congratulate you, you know, on your journey, on your personal evolution, on taking on personal responsibility, and on creating a life that really shows the potential for joy and meaning and making a difference in the world.
Yeah, I don't know how I lived so long in that other place where there was no.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.